Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to Evolution of US Navy Destroyers, a complete guide. And yeah, I love these types of videos, especially from this channel. Like, they do these whole history reviews of whether it's aircraft carriers or certain jets or planes or whatever it is. And I think they're really interesting to see because they just get all this obviously information, but then they have these videos that they've just got from hundreds of years ago. And I'm like, how have you even got this footage? But yeah, I love seeing these videos. And yeah, this channel is probably my favorite channel that I'm reacting to at the moment because the videos are just very addicting, you know. But we're going to jump into this. I am pretty sure I've caught COVID. I've just got over being sick, and now I think I've got COVID now, and I'm feeling pretty bad, to be honest. I mentioned this in my last video, but I don't know if some of you will have seen my other videos, so I'm just mentioning it briefly. Because if in the next few days, I'm going to try not to because I hate not uploading, but in the next few days, say I don't post, it's going to be because of that, because I started feeling ill last night and I'm already feeling pretty horrible. So yeah, if there's no videos upcoming, I do apologize. I'll try and keep them coming, but I just can't stop getting ill at this moment in time. But yeah, we're going to get into this reaction. Hopefully you're going to enjoy. Links are in the description to my Patreon if you want to see some more of my reactions to movies, music, just whatever, literally loads of random stuff that I can't post to YouTube. Links are in the description if you want to find that. But yeah, let's jump into this and see the evolution of US Navy destroyers.
How did the American destroyers go from this to this in a span?
See, whenever I see this, it was in a video yesterday, I just think it's so like, it looks too futuristic even for now. But wait, what was it before? Just to see briefly. Let's go to the start. I mean, look at that.
How did the American destroyers go from this to this in a span of a century? Since 1899, the US Navy has built and designed 35 destroyer classes, and that's not including most subclasses. In this video, we'll take you on a journey to show you how American destroyers evolved to be one of the most common and powerful warships in the Navy. We will cover pivotal design changes, how treaties and wars influenced designs of the warships, and how at the end it always came down to money. At the end of the video, we'll share with you the 36th and the latest class of the American destroyers, and it's not what you think. However, as we take you through the underlying cycles of how destroyer classes evolved, it will all make sense. But if you want to go through the evolution of developing your own fleet, check out...
He's got an ad. Go on, lad.
Battle.
You gotta respect it. You gotta respect it, getting his money.
The story begins in 1866 with the invention of torpedoes. They changed everything. Suddenly, small and more importantly cheap torpedo boats could overwhelm a fleet of much larger ships. A swarm of...
Imagine how horrible it would be to ride in one of these, especially during the war. Oh, that sounds like hell.
Swift torpedo boats, or even a single one, could sneak up on a larger battleship and deliver a deadly payload in the form of a torpedo. To counteract this threat, torpedo boat destroyers were developed by the Spanish Navy with the intention of protecting a fleet from fast-moving torpedo boats.
Look at this footage. Where have they got, again, I don't know where the footage comes from.
The name was later shortened to just destroyers. The US Navy started building its first torpedo boat destroyers in 1899. DD-1 USS Bainbridge was the first American destroyer, and she entered service in 1902. The ship had an impressive speed of 29 knots, and it was powered by 4 coal-fired boilers. Bainbridge-class destroyers were equipped with 2 50-caliber guns, 5 6-pounder guns, and 2 torpedo tubes. In total, 13 ships in this class were built, and most remained in service through the end of World War I. Truxton class was developed simultaneously as Bainbridge class.
See, look at that. I mean, I've just gone over it, but it just looks so different already.
And they were pretty similar, with the main difference being an extra gun and the installation of depth charge racks. The first destroyer class to be powered by steam turbines, and the last one to be coal-fired.
But I thought they were on fire. This is just the engines running for them to move. God damn, look at the fumes.
Was the Smith class. Paulding class was the first to be powered by oil-fired boilers, which increased its speed by about 1 knot. Smith and Paulding were nicknamed Flivvers after Ford Model T for their small size, even though they were about 50% larger than Truxtun and featured a raised forecastle that improved seaworthiness. Starting with the Flivvers, it was now recognized that destroyers would not just be hunting torpedo boats, but would also be torpedo boats themselves. And thus Flivvers were equipped with 3 torpedo tubes with Paulding class using twin mounts. And this was the beginning of the US destroyers becoming multi-mission ships. 1,000-tonners were the first destroyers
Again, one of these in the middle of the ocean, I would absolutely hate it, man.
in the US Navy to have displacement of over 1,000 tons. You probably noticed a pattern by now, how destroyers are slowly getting larger, and the reason for this was fuel. Early destroyers were very inefficient, consumed lots of fuel, and had a very limited range of less than 3,000 nautical miles. Built between 1912 and 1917, the 4-stack type included 5 classes: 4 Cassins, 4 Aylwins, 6 O'Briens, 6 Tuckers, and 6 Sampsons. The last class, the Sampsons, was the first to be outfitted with anti-aircraft armament.
What is this? Is this... Wait, this is... It's like still images of... What, is it like planes being shot in the air?
2 1-pounder 37mm autocannons. Most 1,000-tonners remained in service for less than 10 years, as all of them were decommissioned after the end of World War I. The construction cost was around $800,000 per ship.
Wow. For these times, that's a lot of money.
In 1915, Congress authorized the construction of an experimental class of destroyers, the Caldwell class, which was basically a series of 6 prototype ships. The mass-produced Wicks and Clemson's ships, of which 267 were built, were based on the Caldwell class. These destroyers were to have a speed of no less than 30 knots and to cost no more than $925,000 per ship.
So 23 million today.
In fact, Wicks and Clemson's destroyers had a top speed in excess of 35 knots to be able to travel alongside the Lexington battle cruisers. However, range was a major limitation, and thus Clemson class added 100 tons of fuel tankage at the expense of storing fuel above the waterline, which was risky. Clemson's range was 4,900 nautical miles. Only with the development of underway replenishment was the range issue finally fixed. All 3 classes, Caldwell, Wicks, and Clemson, became known as the Fleshdecker destroyers, as the race for...
Bro, it's just so low. Again, I keep saying it, but it's just so low and... It's just so low and long. But at the same time, I know even today they are just built quite low. I just think in deep seas, it would be so... And like rough seas, it would be so horrible to be in one of these. It's so strange, and like sometimes they're a lot taller. This time there's not really any tall parts of it. It's quite flat.
Forecastle of 1,000-tonners was removed. The flush deck gave the hull great strength at the expense of the deck being very wet, especially during rough seas. Armament varied from ship to ship, but generally featured 4 4-inch 50 caliber guns and 12 torpedo tubes. Most ships had a 3-inch 23 caliber anti-aircraft gun, as well as depth charge tracks. All 3 classes remained in service through the end of World War II. However, about 60 flushdeckers were scrapped in the early 30s due to the Yarrow boilers failing prematurely, and another 35 were scrapped in the mid-30s due to the London Naval Treaty. Some of them were sunk as targets. The last Clemson-class destroyer was built in 1922, and not until 10 years later, in 1932, was the next American destroyer laid down. After a decade of technological advancements, the new classes of destroyers with over-lavish facilities and improved living arrangements led to criticism from old-time destroyer men who nicknamed these new classes gold-platers. The Farragut class was
because people have better lives on them? What?
The first of the 8 classes of gold-platers. Compared to the flush decks, Farraguts were 3.3 knots faster, had 25% more armament, including the new 5-inch 38 caliber guns, and increased range of 5,980 nautical miles. But the ships were not without problems, as they were considered unstable in rough seas. In fact, two destroyers, USS Hull and USS Monaghan, sank during Typhoon Cobra in 1944 as the winds blew at over 100 knots.
Oh my days.
The gold plater classes were subject to the limitations of the London Naval Treaty signed in 1930, which limited naval shipbuilding. Specifically, the US Navy was limited to build 13 ships with displacement of 1,850 tons, and the rest had to be no more than 1,500 tons. The only exception was the Sims class, which was built after the Second London Naval Treaty, which lifted the standard displacement restrictions, and thus the Sims class had a displacement of 1,570 tons. In total, 73 gold platers were built, and they played a major role during World War II, especially in the Pacifics, but 21 of them were lost, including 3 during the Pearl Harbor attack. Another interesting tidbit about the gold platers is that they're among the fastest American destroyers ever built.
Really?
In fact, USS Maury of Gridley class reached a speed of 42.8 knots during her speed trials. Digging deeper into the classes, Mahan class was an improved version of the Farragut that maxed out the 1,500-ton displacement limit. Gridley, Bagley, and Benham classes were part of a series featuring a single stack,
Bro, look at these ones. They're so fascinating how different they are.
but differed in their machinery. At the time, all 3 classes had the largest number of torpedo tubes of any
bro, this one's got a whole load going on. You got like these bits here. You got stuff all here. What the fuck?
US destroyer, 4 quadruple mounts per ship. The Porter class of destroyer leaders was essentially a larger version of the Farragut class, which allowed for a greater range. The Somers class destroyers were built around the 1,850-ton Porter class destroyers, but featured a state-of-the-art propulsion plant at the time, 4 Babcock and Wilcox boilers, as well as economizers installed for greater fuel efficiency. The Livermore class is actually 2 separate classes, the Gleaves class and the Benson class, which only differed in their machinery. Livermore class is considered the first of the 4th generation of American destroyers. The major innovation of the Livermores was the separation of machinery into 2 units.
So I like seeing this because you can see what actually goes on in these things. So you've got cruise berthing space, tank, the engine, the boilers, some more engine stuff, some more boilers, and then you've got this is I guess where the crew does certain things. I mean, it's not a lot. God damn.
With each unit consisting of a fire room with an engine room and own stack. This greatly reduced the risk of a single torpedo disabling the ship. The design proved effective as in October of 1941, USS Kearney was hit by a torpedo launched from a German U-boat that disabled the forward engine room, leaving the aft engine room unaffected. Since both Gleaves and Bensons were built upon the hull of Sims class, one can say that Livermore class is just a 2-stack version of the Sims. The Fletcher class is the most mass-produced American destroyer ever. In total, 175 ships were built between 1941 and 1945 at a cost of $6 million per ship.
And they bought 175 in 4 years. Jeez.
Fletchers are considered the most successful American destroyers ever built, as they were swift, spacious, and were able to not only deliver a punch, but absorb some as well. The ship was designed in 1939 and was based on the lessons learned from the Porter and Somers destroyer leader classes. Additionally, the class incorporated the separation of the engine rooms from the Livermores. Fletcher class was also the first to have a radar built in. While armament varied from ship to ship, Fletchers were generally equipped with 5 5-inch guns, 10 torpedo tubes, 2 Bofors anti-aircraft guns, and 6 smaller 200mm Oerlikon anti-aircraft guns. With lessons learned from gold platers, Fletcher was designed to be much less top-heavy, meaning better handling in rough seas. But because it had a flush-deck design, the seagoing performance was not the best. The size of the boat was limited during the design phase on purpose, so that it remained a torpedo delivery system and not a torpedo target. But still, Fletcher destroyers were the largest ships of its kind produced at the time, with displacement of 2,050 tons, and they were capable of traveling at a speed of 38 knots. Fletchers had a lot of action during World War II. 6 were damaged beyond repair and 19 were lost. After the end of the war, at least 50 destroyers were sold to other countries, and the last Fletcher destroyer was decommissioned from the Mexican Navy in 2001.
Wait, they just sold them. So after they thought, okay, we've got the best of use out of this, they sell them and I guess just build better versions of what they've already built. I don't think they would sell them. That surprised me.
After
Makes
almost
sense,
60 years of being in service. The Allen M.
Wait, what?
And the last Fletcher destroyer was decommissioned from the Mexican Navy in 2001.
They were using them up until 2001. Something that was first designed in the 30s was used in 2001. Do you know how crazy that is?
After almost 60 years of being in service. The Allen M. Sumner class was an upgraded version of the previous Fletcher class. It was 15 inches wider than the Fletcher, but had a 20% increase in the 5-inch gun armament, as it housed 3 twin 5-inch gun mounts. Additionally, the Sumner class had a 50% increase in anti-aircraft armament. The gearing class was essentially the same as the Sumner class, with one key difference. The hull was extended by 14 feet, which allowed more fuel storage and thus more range. And this was especially important in the Pacific region. Because of its slightly larger size, the gearing class was more suitable for upgrades than Sumner class in the long term. Collectively, both Sumner and gearing classes were known as 2200 tonners and were often identified as short hulls and long hulls. In total, 156 such ships were built at a cost of about $8 million per ship. In 1949, USS Norfolk was laid down, a destroyer leader, a ship that was supposed to operate in all weather conditions and hunt submarines. It was to be equipped with the latest and greatest radars, sonars, and other electronics. Furthermore, USS Norfolk was to test out Weapon Alpha, an anti-submarine rocket launcher. Unlike depth chargers, Weapon Alpha did not require the ship to be over the submarine in order to fire. USS Norfolk had a displacement of 5,600 tons, almost twice that of the previous gearing class, making it the largest destroyer ever built at the time. But there was a problem. It cost $62 million.
Flipping hell. For these days, 62 million, so nearly 675 million with inflation. That is money.
Which was almost 8 times the cost of a gearing class.
But I say that, now there are flipping planes or jets that will cost 2, 3, 4 times more than that to build now. So obviously in these times it feels like it would be a lot more money, but even then it's still a lot. But you compare it to planes and stuff, it ain't a comparison.
Destroyer. Moreover, the new technologies installed in Norfolk had many problems, to say the least. For these reasons, the sister ship was cancelled and USS Norfolk became a one-ship class used for testing experimental weapons such as anti-submarine rockets, sonars, and radars. The Mitchell class consisted of 4 experimental ships whose goal was to be the flagships of the destroyer squadrons escorting aircraft carriers. The class was equipped with a new 1200 psi boiler system, which provided more power for the same size plant. However, the novel automation system was unreliable to the point that the first 2 ships of the class had to be reboilered due to frequent breakdowns. The other 2 ships with the original power plants had to be scrapped 9 years earlier than expected. Probably the biggest contribution.
Bro, this is so weird. It's just like a helicopter for like one person with no actual. You're just sitting on this little seat.
Of the Mitchell class to the evolution of U.S. Navy destroyers was testing the operation of small helicopters from the destroyers.
Fuck,
in
that's
fact,
insane.
USS Willis A. Lee was fitted with a small hangar and a landing deck for a Gyrodyne QH-50- helicopter system. The Forrest Sherman class was the last one to be a gun destroyer, as it was the last set of ships to be built without guided missiles.
This looks a lot bigger.
Instead, it had 3 5-inch 54 caliber guns, 1 fore and 2 aft. Besides the 2 previous experimental classes of destroyer leaders, this was the first major destroyer class developed after World War II. Forrest Sherman class was envisioned as a bigger and upgraded version of the Gearing class. Of the 18 produced Sherman-class destroyers, 4 were converted to guided missile destroyers and others were scrapped, as the cost of modernizing them was far greater than the benefits that could have been derived from them. This is the second class of American destroyers named after Admiral Farragut. It was also sometimes known as the Kuntz class, as the USS Kuntz was the first guided missile destroyer ever designed and built. Originally classified as a destroyer leader, it was later reclassified as a guided missile frigate in 1956 because it was significantly larger than the previous destroyer classes. But 19 years later, in 1975, it was yet again reclassified, this time as a guided missile destroyer. The primary armament of the Farragut Kuntz class was a new Terrier surface-to-air missile in a twin launcher.
Well, that
the Convair Rim 2 Terrier missiles were one of the earliest surface-to-air missiles used by the United States Navy. As the ships were refitted over time, all ships had their 2 3-inch 50 caliber guns removed and replaced by 2 quad harpoon anti-ship missile launchers. USS Kuntz also received a helipad during its modernization in 1966. 10 Farragut Kuntz class ships were built between 1957 and 1961, and most of them remained in service through the early 90s.
Jeez,
While Charles F. Adams class was based on the Forrest Sherman class, it was the first one architected to be purely a guided missile destroyer. It was also the last class to use steam-powered turbines. The hulls of Charles F. Adams class destroyers were numbered from DDG-2 to DDG-24. This is because DDG-1 was assigned to USS Guyot of the Gearing class destroyer, the first guided missile destroyer in the US Navy, as it was refurbished in 1956 with Mark 25 Mach 7 beam rider radar and a twin launcher armed with Terrier missiles. Charles F. Adams class destroyers were designed to provide
Why is it so close to it?
air missile defense for aircraft carriers. Over the years, the weaponry and radar systems were upgraded with standard missiles, AN SPG-60 radar and SPG-51D tracker illuminators, which allowed Adams-class destroyers to track 3 missiles simultaneously. A big pitfall of the class was its inability to upgrade its ships with helicopter decks due to the ship's megastructure. In total, 23 ships were built between 1958 and 1967, which were decommissioned in the early 90s. Commissioned in 1962, USS Bainbridge was the first nuclear-powered guided missile destroyer. This destroyer was the only one of her class with a displacement of 9,100 tons, 565 feet or 171 meters long, a top speed of 34 knots, and unlimited range. 100 tons of lead shielding was used on USS Bainbridge to protect its crew of nearly 500. The ship was based on the Leahy class, with the biggest difference being the D2G nuclear reactors. Both classes were originally designated as destroyer leaders, but were reclassified as guided missile cruisers in 1975. But Bainbridge class never really took off due to its cost, as the price of one nuclear destroyer equaled 3 to 4 traditional ones.
What?
The US Navy wanted a quantity of ships, and nuclear-powered ships...
Fuck, you know, look at this picture. Imagine being an enemy and seeing this whole row of just these ships. That would shit you up. How many is that? It just goes back to a point you can't even see.
Were simply not affordable outside of the realm of aircraft carriers. The cost of USS Bainbridge was $163 million at the time of construction, or $1.4 billion in 2020 dollars. The Spruance-class ships were the first to feature 2 major innovations in the US Navy's destroyer design: a flight deck and a gas turbine propulsion. Besides a flight deck, there was also a hangar for up to 2 helicopters. The ship's power plant consisted of a combined gas turbine and gas turbine. Having 4 smaller turbines is more efficient than having 2 large ones, as turbines are most efficient when they're at their maximum power level. For this reason, 2 turbines were installed for each shaft. Spruance-class destroyers were very unpopular with US Congress. While they were more than twice the size of World War II destroyers, they didn't look as good as the Soviet designs, which were armed to the teeth. The ships of this class were arguably underarmed, as they only had two 5-inch automatic guns, anti-submarine missiles, and short-range anti-air Sea Sparrow missiles. But that made sense for the Spruance-class destroyers, which were designed to protect aircraft carriers from submarines, while other classes of ships in the task force were designed to handle strike and anti-aircraft warfare. Eventually, 24 out of the 31 destroyers were upgraded with 61-cell vertical launch missile systems in the mid-80s. This upgrade allowed Spruance...
So we get into a lot more recent now. But the thing is, I'm still so fascinated how the one from, I can't remember how long ago it was, but one of the ones around the World War II era, even before that, he mentioned how it was the quickest ever built. I was just thinking the quickest built since they started. But I'm looking at all the speeds, and one that was built in the 30s or the 40s is quicker than all destroyers to this day, or from what I've seen now. Is that just because, I guess, destroyers don't need to focus on speed? But I would assume just because boats don't go that quick anyway. So the fact that you'd want to just go quicker, it just seems like what would be the case for me. But I don't know, maybe not. Maybe they just can't have destroyers with that speed, with all the weight that's now added to it. It's just impossible. But I don't know, the fact that one that was built 40 years before this one, or 30 years or whatever before this one, is quicker, and then again I'm assuming all the way up until current day it's quicker than all of them, is blowing my mind.
Class destroyers to also engage in anti-ship warfare and land attacks, which it did during Operation Desert Storm, as it fired 112 Tomahawk missiles. But even with the VLS upgrade, the class lacked in anti-air defense. The average unit cost of Spruance-class destroyers was $1.27 billion, with an expected service life of 30 years. However, due to high annual operating costs, which averaged about $57 million per ship, and also the more cost-efficient Arleigh Burke-class destroyers entering service, the U.S. Navy retired the Spruance fleet several years earlier than planned. Before we jump into the next class, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, it's worth mentioning that the U.S. Navy ended up with an unplanned class of destroyers, the Kit class. It was basically a Spruance class with a focus on anti-aircraft warfare. It featured dust separators on the air intakes and also additional air conditioning units, as the Kit class was originally ordered by the former Imperial Iranian Navy. But as soon as the Iranian Revolution happened, the new government cancelled the contract, and the United States decided to keep the 4 ships, which became the Kit class. Eventually, all 4 ships were sold to Taiwan. Arleigh Burke is a true multi-mission destroyer. Built from 1988 all the way through to the present day, the class is capable of anti-submarine and anti-aircraft warfare, as well as engaging in land strikes. Arleigh Burke-class ships are about 20 feet shorter than the Spruance-class ships, but have a larger displacement due to a new hull design which has a wider bow. The ships are built entirely from steel, with the critical areas having double...
Bro, it goes so low. I'm just always thinking, god damn, it must be so intense on one of these.
Bow.
I mean, it has to be, obviously, but look, it's here. There's people standing here. There's no rails to hold on or anything, and it's just goes from this high right into the water.
Ships are built entirely from steel, with the critical areas having double-spaced steel armor to create a buffer from modern rockets.
And they're standing like nothing's happened.
The class was also the first to feature angled shaping techniques to reduce the ship's radar cross-section. Originally, Arleigh Burke destroyers only had a helicopter deck, but no hangars. This was later fixed with the Flight 2A iteration of the class, which included hangars for 2 helicopters, as well as increased number of VLS cells from 90 to 96. There were also 2 major innovations in this class. First was increased automation, which allowed the reduction of crew size on Flight 1 Burke destroyers to 270 compared to 334 on the Spruance class. The second innovation was the Aegis combat system, which was pioneered on Ticonderoga-class cruisers and was then introduced to Burke-class destroyers. The traditional radar systems use a rotating antenna which sees the target only once during its 360-degree rotation. but the computerized Aegis combat system used 4 AN Spy-1D fixed arrays to send out beams of electromagnetic energy in all directions simultaneously, allowing for the capability of tracking hundreds of targets at the same time at an extended range. The average price of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer is $1.7 billion, with an average annual operating cost of $20 million. Burke destroyers are expected to remain in service for up to 40 years. In total, 68 destroyers were built and 5 Flight 2As are currently under construction. The Zumwalt class was to...
So now this is one that I've not really looked into, but it just doesn't, it looks so weird. I don't understand where the weapons are or anything. It seems all hidden and stuff. It's so strange. God damn, man.
To be a 21st century destroyer, as it featured a stealth...
And it can go 30 kilometers, I guess, per hour. Again, slower than the one from the 40s or the 30s. That's just, again, it's so wild to me how that's the case. But with these destroyers, is the speed not that important, or is it just because the weight of what it's carrying it just can't go as fast? Because I would always assume if you're a destroyer or just any sort of attack boat or just a boat in general in the Navy, you're going to want to be able to go as quick as possible, but I guess maybe not.
Profiles, increased automation that reduced crew size by half, and 2 advanced gun systems. Originally, 32 ships were planned that were supposed to replace the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers starting in 2020. But due to cost overruns, that number was reduced to just 3. Zumwalt destroyers are 40% larger than Arleigh Burke-class, hands down the largest American destroyer ever built. Wow. Spanning 610 feet or 186 meters and having a displacement of 15,600 tons. The class was also the first to have an integrated power system composed of gas turbines that power critical generators, which in turn power electric motors to propel the ship. Some consider Zumwalt a failed class, as it tried to incorporate too many new technologies all at once. The US Government Accountability Office estimated that as of June 2020, only 6 of Zumwalt's 12 key technologies were mature. For instance, the 2 advanced gun systems that are installed on each ship have no ammunition and never will, as the Navy can't afford it, because due to the cancellation of 90% of the Zumwalt fleet, the cost of each individual long-range land attack projectile ballooned from $35,000 to $1 million. In the end, Zumwalt-class destroyers are likely to be testbed ships for new technologies.
Okay, so they're not as good as they look, but I guess it is just a look into the future of what they're going to be like.
Similar to the Norfolk and the Mitchell destroyer classes. The cost of each Zumwalt destroyer, including R&D, is $7.5 billion.
That was a big jump up. God damn, it's just more than... It's nearly quadrupled.
If you're still watching...
No, it has quadrupled. It's nearly... What's after quadruple?
You may be wondering, what next? If Zumwalt class was a failure, what is the next generation of US Navy destroyers going to be? The successor of Zumwalt class is Arleigh Burke Flight 3, simply because most of Zumwalt destroyers were cancelled. In fact, the US Navy had to resume construction of Burke's Flight 2A for a period of time before the next generation of the class was ready. Flight 3 has about 1,500 design changes from the preceding Flight 2A. Some of the changes include strengthening the hull to increase the ship's stability, widening the stern, which will increase the ship's displacement from 9,140 tons to 9,714 tons, and finally the biggest upgrade item, Spy-6 radar. Spy-6 radar is about 30 times more sensitive than its predecessor, the AN Spy-1D. Just to put things in perspective, the new radar can even detect a periscope.
What?
The first Arleigh Burke Flight 3 destroyer will be named USS Jack H. Lucas, which is currently under construction. The expected cost of each ship is $1.9 billion, and so far...
Okay, so they've gone back down in price.
14 ships have been approved for construction. If you graph the number of destroyers built of each class, you sort of get a wave pattern. This wave is being influenced by wars, geopolitics, treaties, and technological advancements. But also, it seems that most of the advancements occurred on the classes of ships that were built in smaller quantities. And this makes sense, as you don't want to produce something new in large quantities until it has proven its reliability. So there you have it, a comprehensive review of the evolution of US Navy destroyers, sponsored by Battle Warship Naval Empire.
This channel is so good, man. It is so good. Well, from going less than 1 minute videos to 30 minutes, I don't know about that. I don't know what his older videos were like, but his content is quality. Thank you for this evolution guide. Hopefully you can do more NATO destroyer evolution guides, or perhaps another class of ship. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this reaction. If you want more of this stuff from the channel, let me know. I mean, I'll probably do it anyway, but yeah, until next time, like, subscribe, and peace.